It is an undeniable fact that a lot of people love playing MMOs, and they love the PvP in MMOs. However, what happens when people finish school, finish uni, and then get their new job where they just don't have enough time to keep up with the MMO grind? You log in and everyone is higher level than you. You have to grind for hours to get to max level. But wait, it doesn't end there. You have to attend grossly long amounts of time raiding and such to get a decent piece of armor so that you can actually even compete in PvP. Otherwise, you just get steamrolled. If only I could count the number of wasted hours I spent just so that I could compete in PvP and MMOs, because PvP was seriously my favorite thing. I'm one of these people, and I know for a fact that there are many out there like me. To solve this solution, I decided to make a new game that still gives that MMO PvP feel, but faster, more intense, and with less grind and less reliance on time played. My game is called Elemental. In Elemental, there are no classes, no leveling up, no grinding away for hours to get that epic piece of armor. Elemental is all about PvP. You make your own class, you build your own skill set, so that you can compete in whatever way you want. If it helps, you can think of Elemental like this. It's an FPS like Counter-Strike or Unreal Tournament mixed with an MMO style PvP on steroids. So yeah, that's my little introduction to my game. Now I'm just going to explain a few things about how the combat system works and how I'm going to achieve this. Basically, you don't have a class, as I said before. You have class types, and they are very flexible types. And basically, there's a large number of abilities, and your class gets determined by whatever abilities you equip. And you can equip any number of abilities. Of course, those abilities have prerequisites, like what type of weapon you have equipped, but you can still be very flexible. To make it so that you can't just make a super everything, you can't put the best of everything and the best armor and the best weapon on your character, because your character has a limited number of equip points. Each ability has a number of rankings, and it scales with what rank, but the higher the rank of the ability you put on there, the more equip points it takes. So you have to really balance out your class. This effectively takes part of the balancing of the game out of the developer's hands and into the player's hands. Building your character and your class is half the fun, and getting that perfect build. However, there is no such thing as a perfect build, because there are always different roles in a game. For example, if you're healing, you'll have more healing spells. If you're playing capture the flag, maybe you want to run really fast, or slow people down if you're going to try and kill the flag runner, or trap people and stop them from going anywhere and scoring a point. Whereas if you're in a maybe a elimination 4v4 or something, your goal might be to just debuff and lock down the healer. You will be able to build different types you'll be able to build different class types and save them separately and load them up whenever you want. And this will change your armor and everything. Now, that's how I'm planning to make this work. Basically, player has control, and they can make their unique class. A lot of MMOs have these skill trees, and to be honest, most of them are pretty linear, and there's obvious options that you would never take. I've seen some decent ones, but nothing beats just making your class from scratch by the abilities and the armor you choose. I'm just going to pause the video so it doesn't crash. Okay, so before I go on, I just want to explain one important thing. This is not an MMO. It is you won't log on and run around in an area and join games and such. It'll be more like a first-person shooter lobby where you join a game of a game type, or you join up with friends and then join a game, and then you'll be put directly into that game. No messing around, no running freaking a million digital miles with your character to get to the NPC to do whatever you want to do. So just to make that clear, this game is to be able to have that same fun that you had in the PvP in MMOs, but without the shortfalls of those MMOs, for people who don't have time. So I'm just going to get right in and explain a bit about the combat system. Now you see here I've got my characters, and I've added a UI from last time that wasn't there before. It's very simple, but it's just a placeholder. So I can select my enemy and his portrait comes up here. Now let's try and do ability 2 on him. You'll notice nothing's happening. There's a reason for this. Ability 2 has a prerequisite. And it's not like the prerequisites in other MMOs. Some MMOs, the prerequisites like, oh, you have to do this ability before you can do that ability, or something like that. But this is a bit more complex. Now let's just do ability 1, and then I'll explain ability 2 to you. So you can see, as I did ability 1 twice there, and it took a little bit of damage. Excuse the crappy animation. It'll get better someday. But more importantly is you can see there's some red bars in here. Now these bars represent elements or mana, if you will, and this section up the top, these two sections, are the element viewers. Okay, so now this ability has an elemental alignment, and the alignment here is fire, and it's represented by these red bars. Now I've built 4 fire elements here. Each time I use ability 1, it builds 2 fire elements. Now the thing about ability 2 is that it requires, it's a fire aligned ability as well, but it requires and consumes elements. So if there's no elements, fire elements there, then it cannot be done. Now you'll see here, if I press 2, 2 elements disappeared and a large chunk of damage was done to that player, as you can see. So now I'm just going to show you, you might think, okay, well that's a bit similar, you know, there's some MMOs where you build, you know, you got to do some abilities, build up some charge or whatever it is, and then you can use another ability, but they're generally just, you know, very simple. But this gets a bit more complicated. There are 4 different types of elements in this game. You've only seen fire so far. I'm just going to show you the an earth ability, and it's a small heal. And excuse the weird animation, I don't have a animation for this ability yet, so it's just a random loop. But you can see that it's building earth elements. Now I could use these earth elements later for bigger earth attacks, right? Or bigger heals, for example. And they would consume these elements. But you might notice that I've only got 2 element viewers here, but before I said that there are 4 elements. Well, there are, and I'll tell you what they are. There's fire and earth, as you've already seen, and then there's water and electricity. Now, as you might have guessed, water is directly opposed to fire, and electricity is directly opposed to earth. At least in my game it is. So you cannot build both fire and water at the same time, and you cannot build both earth and electricity at the same time. They are opposites. You can think of it this way, that having 10 water elements is the same as having negative 10 fire elements, and vice versa. Same for nature and electricity. Now because of this, every single ability has its own specific elemental alignment. These 2 here, as you've seen, are fire aligned, and this one is earth aligned. I haven't made any electric aligned ones yet, or water aligned, but it's the concept that matters here. So so basically you have to chop and change your build, your class, so that it has you know, the right alignments, and so you can, you get your element builder abilities, and then you have your element consuming abilities, and they do the real damage. And it's managing this that's important. Okay, so I just quickly want to explain a bit about the elements and how they have slightly different purposes and roles. For example, the fire element is mostly about damage, more damage, and spike damage. Okay, that's basically the purpose of the fire element. So most of the abilities, and not all, there are exceptions, this is just a generalization, most of the fire abilities will be about doing damage. Whereas the earth abilities is more about buffs, heals over time, and scaling damage, like an ability that the more you use it on a player within a certain time, the more the damage scales. The water element is more about healing, shields, and healing and shields, and some CCs for slowing and whatnot. And the electricity element is more about shutting down um, dot DPS, and it also has an element of spike DPS in there. Sorry, major debuffs is the electric element's biggest thing. Okay, so you've got to really chop and change your abilities to get the right combination, keeping in mind that you can't just do all the elements. You can only really effectively pick 2 at a time. Though there are exceptions, I won't cover that in this video. So I just want to explain a bit about some abilities. So he has one ability type that you will never see in any other MMO because, well, they don't have this element system here. And that is manipulation of elements. You can manipulate the elements of yourself, not only yourself, but also other players. So say this guy is a diviner, which is the healer type, not class, because remember there's no classes. So basically he will be identified as a diviner because he equipped a bunch of healing abilities. So that's sort of how it works. And say he's built up 10 water elements, okay? Now, I might go, oh well, I don't want him to use those elements to heal his team. I'm going to screw him up. I'm going to flip his elements around so that he has the polar opposite, which is fire. And he's not going to be able to do anything with the fire elements because all his heals are water. And it'll screw him up for a bit, and you can really tease the other players. Of course, abilities like this have big cooldowns, so can't do them all the time. Now, there's a few other element manipulation abilities, like you can steal charges, so you can steal elements. So say the guy has 10 fire elements and you've got 0, and you're like, crap, I use fire. You can steal those elements. There's an ability to steal them. And so that's another part of it. And yeah, so that it just makes things more intense. You've got to really think on your toes like an FPS, but it's less about your reaction speed with the mouse like in an FPS. And you've got to strategize and be fairly quick at the same time. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of my pet hates in MMO PvP that really frustrates me, and this is besides the stuff about having to grind, and that is, I think there's a real lack of balance in a lot of MMOs, and the excuse is, well, that class was never meant to be able to beat that class. I think that's a bit stupid, and I really hate it, because, you'll be a healer, and, one guy will come up from stealth and he'll stun you, and he'll just chain stun you until you're dead, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I don't accept that as PvP, to be honest, because if there's nothing you can do, well, it wasn't really PvP, it was just one guy hitting a stationary target that couldn't fight back. So basically the idea of this game is that every single ability, every single action that a player has a counter action. It's a bit like chess. You move a rook or a knight in chess, and then you might be in line to take the other guy's queen or whatever, and then he's like, oh crap, I'm going to counter that. I'm going to move my queen here, and now you're in check. Something like that. So basically, it's a game of countering. One guy, someone does the first move, and then the rest is just you've got to quickly get on your feet. Okay, what can I do to counter that? And then what can I do to gain the advantage? And then the other player's job is then to identify what the player's done and then react. And you've got to be really careful about how you react. And also, you've got to think about the role of your build when doing this, because you've got to be able to counter the things that your build is going to be weak against. It's really, it's really a bit of an art and a science at the same time when building your build, or at least that's how it's going to be. So, what was I saying? So yeah, you've got to really be on your toes, and the first person to falter is going to be in a lot of trouble, but there's always a way to come back. So you'll never be in a situation where you can do nothing, unless of course your team is stupid and leaves you behind and it's 4v1, then unfortunately there's nothing the game will do about that. You're not going to be able to counter 4 people smashing on you. That's another thing about this game that I'd like to explain, that's not like on other MMOs. There will be very defined abilities, but you can use a combination of the advantages of abilities to make really specific and really good combinations that work. For example, you might have an ability that makes you invulnerable for an amount of time, a certain amount of time, and then you might have a resurrection ability, and so you can pop the invulnerable ability and then resurrect. Of course, that's just one. There's much more, and I'm not going to tell you them, otherwise it takes away the surprise and the fun of figuring them out yourself. So yeah, it's less black and white. You've really got to, but that's the thing about this game. You don't have to worry about grinding and PvPing, so you have the time to, you know, come up with these things. It's almost like programming. You make your program and then you run it and you're like, oh, there's a few bugs. Well, it's sort of like that. You build your character and you go and you test it out. You play a game and you thought, oh, okay, well, that didn't work. I'll change this ability around and I'll change this armor around, and then you refine it, sort of thing, until you get that perfect thing. But of course, nothing will ever be perfect because there's always different situations that require different builds. So yeah, I hope you like my combat system. I'm pretty happy with it. Coding's going pretty well. I actually did this a little while ago. I've been working on improving my UI, and my brother has joined my team to create the 2D art assets, because obviously you can see that I suck at it. So anyway, I hope you like my ideas. I really do think that this game will, solve a lot of those problems with people not having time to play MMOs, but still wishing they could have the same type of feeling of playing a game. First-person shooters are all good, but they're not everyone's cup of tea all the time. Anyway, catch you later.